This is the Mountain Takes with Isaac. Experience doesn't protect you on mountains. Neither does skill. Neither does confidence. Today we're examining what happens when climbers discover this too late, when they realize that everything they thought made them safe was actually just making them reckless, when the mountain shows them the difference between being good at climbing and being alive. Sit tight. Arun Kumar Tiwari was 53 years old when he arrived at Mount Everest Base Camp in April 2026. He was a senior director at an IT company in Hyderabad, India, the kind of person who builds software systems that other people depend on, who makes decisions in air-conditioned offices, who manage teams and budgets and timelines. For 20 years, his life had been calculated: spreadsheets, performance reviews, 5-year plans. But there was one thing in his life that couldn't be calculated, couldn't be managed, couldn't be controlled through will alone: Mount Everest. Arun was not new to mountains. He had summited Mount Elbrus in Russia to Europe's highest peak at 18,510 feet. He had stood on top of Mount Denali in Alaska at 20,310 feet. He had reached the summit of Mount Aconcagua in Argentina at 22,841 feet. He had climbed other peaks that most people will never even know exist. He was an accomplished mountaineer by any measure, but Everest is different. Everest doesn't care about your other summits. Everest doesn't acknowledge your experience. Everest only cares about whether you respect it enough to survive it. In 2025, Arun made his first attempt at Everest. He trained obsessively for months. He did altitude chamber training. He ran fitness regimens that would have exhausted younger men. He bought the best equipment. He hired experienced guides. He had prepared in every way that preparation is possible. And then he climbed. He pushed through the lower camps. He acclimatized. He moved up the mountain with the discipline of a man used to executing plans. But at 7,200 meters, still almost 3,000 meters below the summit, his body rebelled. Health complications forced him to turn around. He had to descend. He had to go home. He had to admit that despite all his planning, despite all his experience, despite all his will, the mountain had rejected him. That failure haunted him. For 12 months, it consumed him. This was the last thing Arun needed to prove. This was the final mountain on his list. This was the achievement that would define his mountaineering legacy, and he had failed. So in 2026, he returned. He was older now, at 53. He was still fit, but his recovery times were slower. His body was less forgiving than it had been at 52, but he didn't care. He had one last chance, one last climbing season where the weather window would align with his schedule, one last opportunity to do this before time made it impossible. He came back to Everest with a desperation that only comes from a second attempt. This time, everything felt different. The weather in May 2026 was favorable. The route was well established. He had the advantage of knowing what to expect this time. He wasn't a climber anymore who was wondering what Everest would throw at him. He had already been rejected once. Now he was coming back, not with hope, but with something more dangerous than hope. He was coming back with certainty. He was coming back convinced that he had learned the lessons the mountain had taught him in 2025. He was coming back thinking that knowledge plus experience plus willpower would equal success. By May 20th, Arun was at Camp 4 at 26,000 feet, waiting for the weather window to open for the summit push. The forecast was good. The next morning, May 21st, the team began their assault on the summit. Arun moved faster than his guide recommended. His oxygen saturation was lower than it should have been for his fitness level, but Arun felt strong. He felt ready. He felt like this was finally his moment. His guide called for him to slow down. Arun kept pacemaking. By 4 a.m., he had covered more distance than planned. He was ahead of schedule. He was ahead of his guide. He was ahead of the reality of where his body actually was, at 28,000 feet. At 5:30 p.m. on May 21st, 2026, Arun Kumar Tiwari placed his foot on the summit of Mount Everest. He was standing at 29,032 feet, on a platform of ice and rock smaller than a dinner table at the highest point on Earth. The sun was setting. The sky was turning orange. He could see for hundreds of miles in every direction, mountains below him, clouds below him, the entire world arranged beneath his feet. He took photos. He stood there for approximately 15 minutes, and in those 15 minutes, he made a critical decision. He told his guide he felt strong. He said he wanted to descend immediately. He said he didn't want to rest at the summit. He said he wanted to move fast. This was the mistake that would kill him. The descent from Everest's summit is 3,000 meters of vertical drop through the most dangerous terrain on the mountain. It is technically less demanding than the ascent, but physiologically, it is far more deadly. Your body is exhausted. Your oxygen is depleted. Your judgment is already compromised by hypoxia, and you have to navigate fixed ropes, rappel sections, navigate crevasses, and manage unbelievable exposure. Arun began his descent at around 6 p.m. His oxygen saturation was approximately 55% critically low. His brain was being starved of oxygen. His decisions were no longer being made by the Arun who had built a successful IT career. His decisions were being made by a man whose prefrontal cortex was literally shutting down from lack of oxygen. By 6:30 p.m., as Arun descended through the South Summit section, he began to feel nauseous. By 6:45 p.m., he was vomiting. His guide moved closer to him, asking if they should find shelter, asking if they should rest, asking the questions guides ask when they know something is wrong. Arun said he was fine. He said the nausea was temporary. He said they should keep moving. They kept moving. And then, near the Hillary step at around 7:15 p.m., the vomiting became something else. There was blood in it, bright red blood. This is not a normal response to altitude. This is a sign that something critical is happening inside the body. High-altitude pulmonary edema HAPEs. When fluid begins to accumulate in the lungs at extreme altitude, the body can't process oxygen efficiently. The alveoli fill with fluid. The person essentially drowns on dry land. The symptoms are coughing, sometimes blood-tinged sputum, extreme fatigue, difficulty breathing. High-altitude cerebral edema HACEs, when the brain begins to swell from fluid accumulation. The symptoms are confusion, loss of coordination, irrational decisions, hallucinations, loss of consciousness. Arun had at least one of these conditions, possibly both. His guide radioed for additional support. The communication was choppy. Two other Sherpa climbers who had been assisting other clients on the mountain received the distress call and began moving toward Arun's position. By 8 p.m., there were now 4 people with Arun's primary guide and 3 Sherpa climbers. They were all trying to bring him down from the Hillary step. They were all trying to move as fast as safely possible in the dark with a man whose body was failing. By 8:30 p.m., Arun could barely walk. The Sherpas were now physically holding him, using his harness to lower him down the fixed ropes, dragging him through sections of the mountain where one mistake means a 1,000-foot fall into darkness. At 9 p.m., they had descended approximately 300 meters from the Hillary step. Arun's condition was worsening. His confusion was increasing. His body was moving only because the Sherpas were moving it. One of the guides later reported that Arun asked them where they were. They told him they were descending to Camp 4. Arun said, "Which mountain are we on?" This is what extreme hypoxia does. It erases your sense of reality. You literally don't know what mountain you're climbing. By 9:30 p.m., they were still trying to reach Camp 4. Arun's oxygen saturation had dropped to approximately 48%, a level at which the human brain cannot sustain consciousness much longer. His breathing was shallow. His movements were mechanical. The Sherpas were holding him, guiding him, trying to keep him moving down. At 9:47 p.m., just meter below the Hillary step, Arun's body gave out completely. His heart had taken too much punishment. His lungs had filled too much with fluid. His brain had suffered too much oxygen deprivation. His systems began to shut down. The Sherpa guides recognized what was happening. They knew this was a medical emergency at 28,200 feet in the darkness. One of them began administering emergency first aid. They gave him supplemental oxygen. They began CPR. They performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation on a man at extreme altitude and sub-zero temperatures in the darkness, with nothing but headlamps and their own strength. They did this for 11 minutes. They didn't stop because they had hope. They continued because this was what guides do. This was what Sherpas do. Even when they know it's impossible, they try anyway. At 10:47 p.m. on May 21st, 2026, Arun Kumar Tiwari's heart stopped. Despite the efforts of 4 experienced Sherpa guides, despite supplemental oxygen, despite CPR performed by people who have saved lives on this mountain before, Arun could not be resuscitated. The mountain had rejected him for a second time, but this time it was permanent. The news was relayed down the mountain. Expedition organizers were informed. His family in Hyderabad was notified. His wife, Meenakshi, learned that her husband had reached the summit of Everest and then died on the way down. She learned that his body was still on the mountain, at 28,200 feet, just below the Hillary Step, in the death zone where it would remain frozen in ice forever. The question then became, what do you do? Do you attempt a recovery? Do you try to bring the body down? Pioneer Adventures owner Nivesh Karki provided the facts. Recovery from 28,200 feet requires a team of 8 to 12 highly trained Sherpa guides. It requires multiple days of work in sub-zero temperatures. It requires cutting a frozen body out of ice using specialized tools. It requires lowering that body down thousands of feet, avalanche-prone terrain using ropes. It requires massive amounts of bottled oxygen because the guides need to breathe too. It requires a cost of approximately 90 lakh Indian rupees, roughly 94,000 US dollars. And even with all of that effort, the chances of successfully recovering a body from the Hillary Step are extremely low. Insurance provided by the expedition company covers helicopter evacuation, but not manual body recovery. The logistics are nearly impossible. The dangers are extreme. The cost is prohibitive. And the success rate is discouragingly low. So Arun's family made a decision. They decided to leave him on the mountain, not out of indifference, not out of inability to afford recovery, but out of faith. Arun's brother-in-law, Sudhir Upadhyaya, gave a statement to media. He is in Lord Shiva's abode. The process of bringing the body back would have been very badly damaged by the time it reaches us. Such operations, there are not known to be successful. The family decided that Arun Tiwari would remain on Mount Everest, frozen at 28,200 feet, just below the Hillary Step, in the exact location where his heart stopped. He had spent 20 years building a successful career, accumulating achievements, climbing mountains on 6 continents. He had failed once and returned for a second attempt. He had reached the summit of his final mountain, and then the mountain took everything. His body now sits on Everest at the Hillary Step, a permanent resident of the death zone where the temperature never rises above minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, where the wind howls at over 100 miles per hour, where he will remain preserved in ice indefinitely. Future climbers will pass by him. They will see a figure in climbing gear frozen against the ice. They will wonder who this person was, what their story was, what brought them to this place. They will never know that his name was Arun Kumar Tiwari. They will never know that he was 53 years old. They will never know that he came back for a second chance and lost everything. This is what the mountain keeps, not your achievements, not your summits, not your dreams. It keeps your body preserved forever at the place where your ambition exceeded your respect for the reality of extreme altitude. I'm Isaac from the Mountain Takes. If you've ever pushed too hard for something you wanted, if you've ever ignored the warning signs from your own body, if you've ever convinced yourself that you were strong enough to do the impossible, subscribe for more stories of mountains that teach lessons that cost lives. It was May 20th, 2026, at approximately 8 a.m. when Sandeep R reached the summit of Mount Everest. The morning was clear. The visibility was perfect. He could see for hundreds of miles in every direction the curvature of the earth visible beneath him, clouds arranged thousands of feet below like a white ocean. He stood on the highest point on earth and took photos. Tulasi Reddy, his climbing partner of 50 days, was somewhere behind him on the mountain, also making his push toward the summit. Sandeep had trained hard for this moment. He had invested months of preparation, enormous expense, and the physical and mental endurance required to reach 29,032 feet. He had reached the summit. He had made it. The rest was supposed to be the easier part, the descent, getting down, going home to his 17-year-old son waiting in Arizona. But Sandeep ARE was 46 years old, and he didn't know what Arizona meant anymore. Not really. He had been born in India, had climbed in the Himalayas as a young man, understood mountains the way only someone from India can understand mountains. But he had lived in Arizona for years. He had become an American climber, hiking the Grand Canyon rim to rim, preparing his body in the desert. He had brought his climbing partner Tulasi with him to Everest as more than a partner, as a best friend, someone he had spent 50 days with at altitude, someone he had shared the trial of climbing with. Tulasi had said of him, he was super strong climber, not just physically strong, the kind of strength that comes from having something to prove to yourself. The descent from the summit began at approximately approximately 9 a.m. on May 20th. Sandeep started carefully, following the fixed ropes, moving methodically through the south summit area. The route was crowded. May 21st had been the projected weather window for most expeditions, but some teams were taking their shot on May 20th. There were other climbers on the mountain, other people moving up and down, all trying to navigate the same fixed ropes, the same sections of terrain that killed people every season. Sandeep moved down slowly. He didn't rush. He understood the mountain enough to know that rushing kills more people than caution. By noon, he was passing through the level terrain between the south summit and Camp 4 at 26,000 feet. His eyes had been exposed to extreme altitude conditions for hours. The sun reflecting off snow and ice creates an intense glare at sea level. At 28,000 feet, that glare becomes something else. The UV radiation is unfiltered by atmosphere. The reflection. Off-white ice and snow is blinding literally. Climbers wear specialized glacier glasses with dark lenses to protect their eyes, but nothing fully protects you from extreme altitude sun exposure. Nothing fully prevents the damage. Sandeep's eyes began to burn. This was normal. Every climber experiences this, but the burning didn't stop. It intensified. By 1 p.m., as he continued his descent below the south summit, his vision began to blur. This was no longer normal altitude eye strain. His eyes were inflaming. The delicate tissue on the surface of his eyes, the epithelium, was being burned by UV radiation and dehydration. Snow blindness photokeratitis had begun. He couldn't see clearly anymore. The terrain in front of him was becoming a white blur. The fixed ropes he was following were becoming harder to locate. The steps he needed to place his feet on were becoming indistinct. Sandeep's guides moved closer. They could see something was wrong. His movements had changed. His pace had slowed further. They were asking him questions in Nepali, in English, trying to assess his condition. Sandeep told them his eyes hurt. He said the sun was bright. He said maybe if they descended faster, got to lower altitude where the air was thicker, where the sun exposure wasn't so intense, his eyes would improve. So they descended faster. But the faster descent created new problems. At extreme altitude, descending faster means less acclimatization time between camps, less recovery time for the body. Sandeep's oxygen saturation was already critically low from the summit push. His body was already compromised by exhaustion and thin air. His brain was already being starved of oxygen. And now he was pushing his body harder, making it work faster when it was already at the breaking point. By 2:30 p.m., his eyes weren't just burning, he was losing vision. Colors were becoming unclear. Shapes were becoming ambiguous. He was moving down a mountain he could no longer see clearly, being guided by men whose voices he could hear but whose faces were becoming indistinct. This is when altitude sickness compounds with physical injury. This is when the body starts failing on multiple fronts simultaneously. Sandeep's guides recognized the severity now. This wasn't eye strain. This was snow blindness progressing rapidly. They called for additional support. Other Sherpa guides from lower camps began moving up to intercept them. The word was passed down the mountain. Climber in distress, vision loss, need additional hands to bring him down. By 3 p.m., Sandeep R could not see. Total blindness. Not vision impaired, not reduced vision blind. His eyes had been exposed to extreme UV radiation for almost 7 hours straight of altitude. The epithelial cells of his corneas had been fried. His tears had evaporated in the dry air. His eyes had simply stopped working. He was now a blind man at 26,500 feet on a mountain that kills people who can see everything. He was being guided by touch, by voice, by the physical contact of Sherpa hands on his body, telling him where to step, how to move, when to breathe. At this point in the story, most people would have turned around completely. Most climbers with total vision loss at high altitude would say, "Find a way to get me to shelter, get me oxygen, get me down immediately." But at extreme altitude, there is no immediately. There is no helicopter rescue at 26,500 feet. There is only the incredibly slow process of hand-guiding a blind climber down a mountain where one mistake means a 1,000-foot fall in any direction. One mistake means death, and Sandeep's guides had to make that walk anyway. They had to get him down. They had no other choice. 5 Sherpa guides were now with Sandeep R. They had established a human chain. One guide in front, one behind, guides on either side, and Sandeep in the middle, literally being lowered down the mountain. He was holding on to ropes, but he wasn't navigating them. The guides were navigating for him. Step left, step right, hold the rope, don't let go. Lower yourself slowly. There's ice here. Watch the slope. The guides were giving constant verbal instructions because Sandeep's eyes were absolutely useless. But there was another problem developing. Snow blindness was one issue. But at extreme altitude, the body under extreme stress often experiences other acute conditions simultaneously. Sandeep was showing signs of high-altitude cerebral edema-HACE-swelling of the brain from oxygen deprivation and fluid accumulation. His confusion was increasing. He was asking where they were. He was forgetting instructions seconds after receiving them. He was becoming disoriented. The guides recognized HACE symptoms. They knew this was critical. A climber with HACE can lose consciousness suddenly. A climber with HACE can die very quickly. They descended through Camp 4 around 5 p.m. Sandeep was given supplemental oxygen. Medical supplies were used. The guides worked with him, trying to stabilize his condition, trying to keep him conscious, trying to keep moving downward. Every meter of descent meant the air was slightly thicker, the oxygen levels were slightly higher, the chance of survival was slightly better. But every meter also meant more exposure, more time at altitude, more chance that his body would fail completely. By 7 p.m., they had reached Camp 3 at approximately 23,500 feet. Sandeep was still blind. He was still showing signs of HACE. He was disoriented. He was confused. His body was failing in multiple ways simultaneously. The guides gave him more oxygen. They hydrated him. They tried to restore some level of consciousness and stability. They had to get him to Camp 2, which was another 2,500 feet of descent, another several hours of work guiding a blind man down a mountain. The decision was made. Continue the descent through the night. Don't stop. Don't rest. Just keep moving down, because staying at altitude is death, and the only thing that might save Sandeep R is getting him to lower altitude where his brain can begin to recover, where the oxygen levels are higher, where emergency medical care is available. The guides roped him off. They began the night descent with headlamps cutting through darkness, guiding a blind man down a mountain he couldn't see, in temperatures that would freeze exposed skin in minutes. Between 9 p.m. and midnight, they navigated below Camp 3 toward Camp 2. The terrain got slightly easier as they descended. The air got slightly thicker. Sandeep's condition was still critical, but at least the immediate danger of extreme altitude was decreasing with every meter down. The guides were exhausted. They had been working non-stop for hours, but they kept moving. This is what guides do. This is what Sherpa climbers do. When someone's life depends on them, they keep moving. By 1:30 a.m. on May 21st, they reached Camp 2 at approximately 21,000 feet. Sandeep R was brought into a tent. Medical assessment was immediate. His eyes were severely damaged, snow blindness confirmed, but he was below the altitude where immediate death from HACE was likely. His oxygen saturation was approximately 58% low, but survivable at this altitude. He was confused, but conscious. He was alive. They had gotten him down alive. The guides gave him supplemental oxygen. They administered medications for HACE. They hydrated him. They kept him warm. They did everything that could be done at 21,000 feet in the middle of the night. In a tent, Sandeep R had successfully summited Mount Everest. He had overcome extreme altitude, extreme weather, and the physical limit of human endurance to reach the summit. But on the descent, his eyes had failed him. His brain had swollen. His body had said no more, and all the guides' effort, all their skill, all their willingness to keep moving it had gotten him to Camp 2 alive, which seemed like survival. But survival at 21,000 feet at midnight after extremes. Altitude sickness is not the same as being out of danger. The altitude is still dangerous. The lack of oxygen is still severe. The body is still compromised. HACE doesn't reverse quickly. Just because you're at a lower altitude, it continues to progress. The swelling in the brain continues. The brain can herniate. The respiratory system can fail. At 2 a.m. on May 21st, Sandeep R's condition began to deteriorate again. His breathing became irregular. His consciousness began to fade. The guides kept him on oxygen. They kept trying. But the swelling in his brain had progressed too far. The damage was too extensive. At approximately 3:30 a.m. on May 21st, at Camp 2 at 21,000 feet, with 5 Sherpa guides around him, with oxygen flowing into his lungs, with men who had spent hours trying to save his life holding his hands in the darkness, Sandeep R's brain gave out. The swelling was too much. His respiratory system failed. He died not from falling, not from avalanche, not from the immediate catastrophe that people imagine when they think of mountain deaths. He died from the mountain's slow torture. He died from a combination of conditions. He died from being a blind man at extreme altitude, whose body simply ran out of function. And the hardest part of this story isn't that he died. The hardest part is that his family in Arizona would never see his body. His 17-year-old son would never get to say goodbye to his father because Sandeep R died at Camp 2. And bringing his body down from Camp 2 is logistically complex. Bringing a body from 21,000 feet down to base camp requires additional porters, additional risk, additional resources. So his family made the decision: leave him on the mountain. His body remains at Camp 2 at 21,000 feet, preserved in the cold, a permanent resident of the place where his lungs failed. Tulasi Reddy, Sandeep's climbing partner and best friend for 50 days on the mountain, gave a statement to media. He was the strongest climber I have ever met. On the mountain, none of that strength matters. The altitude doesn't care how strong you are. It just takes what it needs. On May 20th, Sandeep R could see everything the world laid out beneath him from the summit. By May 21st, he was blind. His brain was swelling, his body was failing, and his journey up ended in a way he never imagined possible when he was taking those summit photos in the morning sun. This is what Everest does. It gives you the summit and takes away everything else. It gives you the achievement and takes away your sight. It gives you the victory and takes away your son's father. It gives you 50 days of climbing with your best friend and then separates you forever at 21,000 feet. I'm Isaac from the Mountain Takes. If you've ever pushed your body beyond what it could handle, if you've ever ignored the signals that something was wrong, if you've ever convinced yourself that strength alone is enough to overcome any obstacle, subscribe, because there are more stories of mountains that teach these lessons at the cost of lives. It was 6:30 a.m. on April 18, 2014, in the Khumbu Icefall on Mount Everest. The Khumbu Icefall is the most dangerous section of the entire route to Everest summit, a constantly moving river of glacial ice that breaks apart, shifts, and collapses without warning. Seracs, massive blocks of ice hanging from the glacier, can fall at any moment. Crevasses open and close. The terrain is unstable by definition. Every year, Sherpa workers climb through this icefall multiple times, fixing ropes, establishing routes, carrying loads that will eventually make their way to higher camps where paying clients will use them. The work is essential. The work is also deadly. On the morning of April 18th, a group of approximately 40 Sherpa porters and climbing guides were in the icefall, working on a section between Camp 1 and Camp 2. They were establishing the main route for the 2014 spring climbing season. This was early season work. The ropes had to be in place before the commercial expeditions could move clients higher. The work was routine in the sense that it happened every year, but routine does not mean safe. Routine only means that people had become accustomed to the danger. At approximately 6:30 a.m., a massive serac, an estimated block of ice weighing hundreds of tons, fractured at its base. The serac had been hanging above the route for weeks, holding in place by the pressure of the surrounding ice. But the constant movement of the glacier, the slight warming of spring, the imperceptible shifts in ice structure, something changed. The serac's foundation failed, and 300 tons of ice began to fall. The sound of a serac collapse at that scale is described by survivors as deafening a roar that seems to come from the mountain itself. But sound travels slower than falling ice. By the time the Sherpas heard the warning, the ice was already falling on them. The serac exploded into massive chunks the size of houses, fragments the size of cars, shrapnel the size of boulders. It fell on the exact section of the route where the 40 Sherpa workers were positioned. 16 Sherpas were killed in the collapse, a detail that itself speaks to the invisibility of Sherpa workers in the Western mountaineering narrative. The survivors descended immediately, moving as fast as the terrain allowed, carrying news of the disaster down the mountain. By midday, the information had reached base camp. By evening, it had reached the world. Media outlets reported avalanche on Everest, 16 dead, but most media outlets were imprecise about what had actually happened. They called it an avalanche. It was a serac collapse, a different hazard, with different implications about responsibility and prevention. What makes the 2014 Khumbu Icefall collapse significant is not just the death toll. Though 16 deaths in a single incident was the deadliest moment in Sherpa mountaineering history, what makes it significant is what it revealed about the system that had been in place for decades without serious challenge. The Sherpas who died were paid between $400 and $600 per season to do the most dangerous work on the mountain. Their Their life insurance was minimal. Their safety equipment was basic. The routes they were establishing were chosen by expedition companies to optimize client flow, not Sherpa safety. When a serac fell, there was no way to predict it. There was no way to prevent it. There was only the reality that young men from rural Nepal were doing extraordinarily dangerous work for poverty wages so that wealthy climbers from around the world could attempt to reach a summit. The names of the dead Sherpas circulated through the climbing community, but rarely made it into mainstream Western news. The names of the clients on the mountain that year, the wealthy, businessmen and celebrities who had paid $45, their stories were told, their achievements were documented. But the names of the Sherpas who fixed the ropes for them, who carried their loads, who died doing that work, remained largely anonymous. One of the survivors, a Sherpa named Ang Shering, gave a statement that captured the systemic nature of the problem. "We Sherpas risk our lives every day on this mountain. We have families depending on us, but nobody cares about our safety until people die, and then nobody remembers our names." His words, documented by journalists covering the disaster, pointed to a reality that the climbing community had largely ignored. The mountain's danger does not discriminate between Sherpa and client, but the mountain's rewards certainly do. The response in the climbing community was significant but limited. Some expedition companies announced they would increase Sherpa wages. Some pledged to improve safety protocols. Some announced that they would not attempt Everest that season out of respect for the dead. But most of the commercial expeditions continued. The clients had paid their fees. The mountain had taken its toll, and the system continued almost unchanged. What happened after April 18, 2014, was that the names of the dead Sherpas slowly faded from public consciousness. News cycles moved on. The documentary makers captured footage of grieving families in Sherpa villages. But those documentaries were rarely watched by the mainstream audience. The climbing industry continued. Everest continued to be climbed. New Sherpa workers were recruited. They climbed the same icefall. They took the same risks. They earned the same poverty wages. The investigation into the 2014 collapse determined that the serac had been inherently unstable for some time and that there was no practical way to have predicted its collapse. This was technically true, but it also meant that the system which had placed workers in that exact location every single year was fundamentally flawed. A system that places human beings in front of hazards that cannot be predicted or prevented is not a system with acceptable risk. It is a system that has decided the risk to other people's lives is acceptable. If you've ever wondered who pays the real price for climbing mountains, if you've ever questioned what it means that the most dangerous work is done by the poorest workers for the lowest wages, subscribe, because there are more stories of the people the mountains take who never get to be famous. Their names matter too. I'll see you on the next descent.